Welcome back to Knowledge is Kings, guys. I am Kings, and it's common around this time of year for those throwing Christmas parties to bust out their most festive trays. So I thought it would be festive to make my own version in the shape of a candy cane. Let's get to it. The start of this project is the same for many projects. I start by cutting rough stock to length. Then it's over to the planer to get a nice smooth edge. From there, I rip the pieces to about a 32nd of an inch over the final dimension. Then back to the joiner to smooth out that cut. Then back to the table saw, joiner, 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 until I have all the pieces I need. Because there are so many pieces, I wouldn't be able to glue them all before the glue started to set up, so I decided to glue them in two separate sections. For anything that will be in contact with food, I use Titebond 3 as it's supposed to be food safe for indirect food contact. While that glue sets up, I'll work on the template. I'll have the template on my website if you'd like to use it. I'll put a link in the description. So when you go to print the PDF, you can select poster and it will allow you to print the pattern in full scale. You'll just need to tape the pieces together. Once I had all my pieces taped, I cut it out and glued it onto a scrap piece of MDF. I cover the whole part with blue tape to control the spray glue overspray. Once it's pressed on, I cut close to the line on the bandsaw. I leave the line so I have something to accurately sand to later. Then I sand everything to that line. When the outside of the pattern is smooth, I take it over to the scroll saw to cut out the inside of the pattern, again cutting close but not to the line. Back at the spindle sander, I sand the inside to that line. Now this was one option for creating the pattern, but here is what I actually used for my pattern. I showed how to do it manually because not everyone has a CNC machine, but obviously this is the fastest, most accurate way to cut out my pattern. I try to show each pattern next to each other for a nice juxtaposition here, but the camera was out of focus, so it's hard to see the subtle difference between the two. But needless to say, the CNC version is better and it doesn't need sanding. By that time, the glue had set up on my first glue up, so it was time to take those two sections and glue them together as one piece. When the glue on that had set up, I used a paint scraper to scrape off the glue drops. You can see there was a little wobble on the board, and if I send it through the planer as it is, it'll keep that wobble. Here's a little trick that only works if your entire piece fits on the infeed and or the outfeed table of your planer without being in the cutters. Find the corner that you need to shim and glue a shim on that corner. With the wobble controlled, I can now send it through the planer shim side down. Then, once I have a flat shim-free side, I put that side down and just plane off the shim with everything else. You can see on the left-hand side there was a little bit more that I could have planed down, but I wanted to keep the board as thick as possible, and that part won't be in the cut anyway. I use the pattern and trace the shape onto my board, then cut it close to the line on the bandsaw. Once I have it cut out, I glue the pattern on. This needs to be glued on pretty securely as I will be pressing router bits against the pattern. The first router bit I use is a spiral upcut flush trim bit. I think these can also be called pattern bits. I use the upcut bit because it shears the fibers on the bottom upward so it doesn't produce tear out. And at the top, when it shears upward, the fibers are trapped in between the top and the pattern, so they also cut off nicely without tear out. After my first pass around the pattern, I clean the table off and take the tape off that got caught around the piece and made another final pass. I remove the tape from the inside just so it doesn't gum up my router bits any more than they need to be, and you can see I have a different bit in the router table. This is a tray bit. I thought a big one like this would be nice for this project as it can clear out a lot of the time. When using a bit like this on top of the pattern, sometimes the router can tip and gouge out parts you don't want to be gouged out, so I thought I would try to do this on a table saw instead of using a hand router like I would normally do. Do not do this. In order to get the bearing of the router bit to hit the pattern, I needed to have the bit very high, removing a lot of material at once. If I were doing it with a hand router, I would be able to see how much I was taking off and could stay away from the edges, so I wouldn't need to use the bearing at first. So to start, I slowly lowered the tray onto the bit and started clearing the inside out. It's hard to tell, but my hand is not over the bit. Never put your hand directly over the router bit. As the piece was lowered, the bit grabbed and ripped the piece out of my hand. Thankfully, it didn't ruin any part of my body, and it didn't ruin any part of the tray either. Yikes. Yeah, you'll have that on these big jobs. It did ruin the pattern. Well, in spite of what just happened, I lowered the bit and tried to see if it was possible to just clear a little out on the router table, but no, it still felt unsafe. So on to doing it the right way. So I secured it to my table, and after having the CNC create a new pattern, I began the routing process, taking off a little bit at a time. Once I get down deep enough, I take the pattern off and I use the new side of the tray to run the router bearing against. Once the tray was all carved out, I rounded all of the corners over at the router table. After a thorough sanding, I coat the entire piece in Odie's oil. I just rub it on and then buff it off. And with that, the project is complete. So I really like how this project turned out. All I need to do now is add some candy. Now, as you saw, I had a large cutoff piece from the first tray, so I cut out a couple of smaller trays on the CNC to match the big one. Altogether, I think they look pretty cool. And by using a tray bit and making any pattern you come up with, the options for any tray design are limitless. Anyway, that's all I had for this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a like as it really helps out the channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you can be entered into our current giveaway, details in the description, and so you don't miss out on any of our random giveaways. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, I like that.